Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to this kind and great program that we have for you this morning. My name is Aisha Dixon. I'm the director of the UCLA Emeriti Retirees Relations Center, and we are your on-campus liaison for pre-retirement planning and post-retirement engagement. We have our colleague here, Maria Lubrano, and our goal is for you to stay in touch with us post-retirement and let us know what we can do to support any sort of advocacy on your behalf. We serve a large constituency of about 18,000 retired faculty and staff. We do our best with a mighty team of 3 to do these programs in person and on Zoom to kind of provide you with a wealth of resources and information for all things UCLA and campus. And we're so glad to have our speaker today, Daniel Fessler with the Kind Institute. A brief history with the Kind Institute, that it was established to provide a platform for dedicated research, education, and the practice of kindness. It has a name where you just want to make sure you're very kind and open to things. So I will let Daniel talk more about the Kindness Institute, their initiatives and goals when coming to the campus. There is some screen sharing. I also am recording this, so I will be able to post it on our YouTube channel later. So if you have to step away for a bio break, please feel free to do that. I will ask that everyone mute themselves in case there's construction, animals, or anything in the background that you don't want us to hear or see. Please mute yourself. You're more than welcome to type questions in the chat, and we will do that during the Q&A section. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Daniel. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction, and also for the opportunity to speak to everyone this morning. So it's exciting to be here, and it's great to see people engaged and interested in these initiatives. So I'm going to screen share. I'll try not to make this too lecture-y, and hope to make it a little bit engaging, but there is, I think, some substantive information that I'd like to convey to you. And so I'll show some slides for that. Let's see here. Okay, so is everybody seeing my title slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so as Aisha mentioned, the UCLA Bedari Kindness Institute was launched in September 2019 with a very generous multi-million-dollar donation from the Bedari Foundation. The Bedari Foundation is a family foundation, one of the principals of which is a UCLA alum, hence the connection to our wonderful campus. And over the recent past, we've been undergoing a restructuring process as we've realigned some of our goals with those of the larger university, including its emphasis on research and education and engagement with the Los Angeles community. The Institute is composed of a large number of faculty members from across the entire campus. And as you all know, one of the wonderful things about UCLA as an institution is the breadth of research conducted here. And of course, the fact that we're all geographically in one location. So colleagues from across the campus can interact more easily than is true at some institutions. And we have faculty members in the Kindness Institute who are from, fields as diverse as the Department of History, the School of Medicine, the Business School, sociology, anthropology, psychology, and so on. So we really have an incredible breadth of different types of scholarly expertise, people working on different kinds of research that touches on the things that promote kindness, the benefits of kindness, and the obstacles to kindness, both at a personal and social level, and across a variety of time spans. To date, we have supported quite a number of faculty research projects a large number of graduate summer fellowships, and quite a number of undergraduate courses, primarily but not exclusively through the university's wonderful Fiat Lux program, where freshmen get an opportunity to get exposed to close one-on-one interactions with faculty members, and a whole host of different courses touching on issues of kindness and contemporary life have been offered by a wide variety of faculty, some of whom are members of the Institute and some of whom are not. And we're very fortunate, in addition to the Bedari Foundation's generous support, to have received over $1 million in unsolicited additional donations since our founding. So it's just kind of, I think, speaks to the public recognition of the importance of kindness in, an increasingly divided and polarized world. Our mandates are to explore basic research and scholarship and the things that promote or are obstacles to kindness and the benefits of kindness, as I said, and also to educate both within and beyond the university in regard to this scholarship. So what I'm going to do today, there's no way that I could fairly represent the large number of different projects pursued by members of the Kindness Institute, because their expertise is so diverse, and some of the projects, even though I'm very excited about them, I'm really not an authority to speak on them myself. Instead, what I'm going to share with you today are a couple of projects that I'm much more familiar with, some that directly involve research that I've been included in, and others where I've played a more peripheral role, but I have been an advisor, and I'm very excited about those projects. But before we get to that, I want to show you a little video, and just try and immerse yourself in the events of the video, and then we'll talk afterwards about the experience of watching the video. So, is that playing for everybody? Yeah, you won't hear any sound if you don't hear any sound. So just pause for a moment now and reflect on the way that you're feeling, okay? And the reason that I'm asking you to do that, this video was actually was produced by a Thai life insurance company, interestingly. We use it in a whole series of experiments on the things that promote or are obstacles to the spread, the social influence of pro-social behavior, and conversely of antisocial behavior. So we show that video to research participants. Some of this research is done online, some of it is done in my lab at UCLA, and some of it is done on the streets of Los Angeles, okay? I'm gonna get to the experience that at least some of you had just now in a minute, but let me give you some basic theoretical background to try and make sense of why we think you feel the way that you do and how it influences behavior. So the basic idea here, I'm an evolutionary anthropologist. I try and understand contemporary human behavior from the perspective of understanding the history of our species over deep evolutionary time. And the basic idea here is that natural selection has shaped the psychological architecture that we are all heirs to as members of the human species in such a way that individuals maximize the fitness benefits in biological terms that they obtain from social interaction. Now, our species is remarkable in that it is incredibly cooperative, far more cooperative than any other species on the planet. We engage in all kinds of positive interactions with unrelated individuals that are just not characteristic of any other species, right? And the extent to which that pays for the individual, and I should point out here that I'm not suggesting that people are Machiavellian. We are, these mechanisms are part of our psychological architecture, often operating at deeply unconscious levels, okay? Well, the extent to which it is beneficial for the individual to engage in prosociality, that is to assist others, depends on the extent to which one is embedded in a community of prosocial actors, okay? Because if others are cooperative, if others are helpful, if others are altruistic, then it pays to do so oneself because we'll be part of collective events in which all parties benefit, right? Conversely, if others are antisocial, if they're self-interested, if they're exploitative, then the altruist is simply a sucker, right? This is somebody whose altruism is exploited by others. And they're taken advantage of, and they never reap the benefits of being part of a cooperative organization or effort, right? At the same time, individuals who are self-interested, if they behave in a self-interested manner in the presence of pro-social individuals, they may be punished for their selfish behavior. But if they do so in the presence of other individuals who are similarly self-interested, there may be no costs to their action and only benefits. So what this suggests is that we expect people to adjust their behavior to their social surroundings such that when people are surrounded by kind, altruistic others, they will be inclined to behave so themselves. And similarly, when they're surrounded by self-interested, exploitative people, they will be much less inclined to be pro-social and potentially to be antisocial themselves. In other words, kindness and its opposite are contagious, we think, right? Now, critically, this depends on how one interprets one's surroundings, importantly, one's immediate surroundings. And by the way, if this sounds like a dark view of humanity, I think that's a glass half empty view. On the contrary, I think there are very few true saints and very few true sinners in our species. Instead, most people are responsive to their social surroundings, such that there is the opportunity to create self-sustaining pro-social communities where each individual's actions promote prosociality among others. Okay, so as I said, critically, this depends on how people interpret their immediate surroundings, and how they interpret their surroundings should be influenced by their prior experience, both in that community and in general, right? We think that people's responses to immediate circumstances are driven by their emotions. And probably some of you at least, perhaps all of you, experienced strong emotions watching that little video that I showed you, right? Those emotions themselves are part of our species typical psychology that we're all heirs to, right? And those emotions were shaped by natural selection over evolutionary time. Now, emotions are very much responses to something in the moment. So you're probably no longer feeling, at least not feeling anywhere near as strongly, the emotions that you were feeling a few moments ago, right? But over longer time spans, the experience that we have shapes our attitudes. In other words, our expectations of what we think others are going to do in a given situation, right? So when we're presented with a situation, those attitudes shape our interpretation of it. And that interpretation in turn determines the kinds of emotions that we will experience when we witness events in that situation. And in particular, there's a technical term for the emotion that probably many of you experienced, which is elevation. This is this positive, uplifting emotion. It's not a common everyday English word just because languages don't necessarily label all of the different emotions that people experience. And elevation is the uplifting experience caused by witnessing remarkable pro-social behavior. And as I'm going to show you, it motivates generalized pro-social behavior. It doesn't motivate imitation in the sense that we want to do exactly what we have seen somebody else do, but instead it motivates just a desire to assist others. But as I said, how we interpret a given situation depends on our expectations, and those expectations derive from our prior experience. So the same person witnessing the same events may experience, one person witnessing the same event may experience different emotions than another person based on their interpretation of that event. Was that young man offering the seat on the bus to the tired-looking young woman because he was an altruist, or was he simply trying to appear to be a nice guy because he was attracted to her, right? That is, did he have some ulterior motive? Now, how you interpret that depends on your prior experiences. And so we can talk about a spectrum from idealism to cynicism, where the idealist expects others to be pro-social and the cynic expects others to be antisocial. So to explore how elevation is affected by the degree of idealism and how it then shapes behavior, we performed a large number of experiments where we randomly assigned participants to either view the video that you just saw or to view a video, a screenshot of which is on the right there, of another young man in an urban environment, in this case performing a form of gymnastics called parkour, where you see him doing a somersault off a wall there. In both cases, these are impressive and unusual behaviors, but one of them is pro-social and one of them is not. And then in some of our experiments, we didn't show either video. Instead, we just showed a mundane video of people riding on public transport. Nothing interesting is happening at all. And so it doesn't elicit any kind of emotion. We've done many, many of these studies. I'll just describe some overview of them here, right? So what we do is first we ask people how much they expect others to be honest, pro-social, or self-interested, right? What we call the idealism-cynicism scale. And then we ask them about their emotional experience. And because everyday English doesn't have the term elevation in it, we ask them about other folk affect terms, like being uplifted or moved, right? We ask them about their bodily symptoms, like tears in one's eyes, right? Being choked up, feeling a warm feeling in one's chest. These are all bodily experiences. And importantly, we ask them about their motivation to act after having this witnessed this video, right? So we explore things like the extent to which, we explore things like the extent to which people want to help other people. And as a control to show that this is specific to elevation, we measure their general positive affect. So how much, for example, they say they're happy, in a good mood, and so on, right? Because the argument here is that this is a very specific response to a very specific set of stimuli. I'll just show you some typical results collected on the streets of Los Angeles where we just walk up to strangers with a tablet computer and we ask them if in exchange for $5, they'd be interested in watching this short video and then telling us about their experiences. Up here on the left, you see that when we combine those folk affect terms, the somatic sensations and so on, that when people watch the prosocial video, shown by this distribution of points on the right, they report much more elevation than when they watch the athletic video shown on the left. And that's true when we look at, when we decompose that into things like how uplifted they feel, or tears in the eyes, a warm feeling in the chest, and so on, right? We ask them how much they want to help people, and you see a big difference between the two conditions there as a result of having been assigned to one of those two videos, right? And we ask them, would they be willing to give a portion or all of the payment that we're going to provide to them to the Mattel Children's Hospital at UCLA? We do this in a double-blind fashion so that the researcher who's interacting with the participant doesn't actually know what dollar amount, if any, the participant has donated. And the participant knows that the researcher doesn't know. Okay, so this isn't a case of just wanting to make a positive impression on the person you're interacting with. And you see here in the bottom right that indeed in the elevating condition, people give more money. In fact, they gave so much money over the course of these experiments that folks over at UCLA Health started inviting my postdoctoral fellow to fancy dinners and special events and so on, because he was writing the checks as we collected the money from our participants. He was writing the checks and making donations, and the folks in development at UCLA Health thought he was some kind of an affluent donor, when in fact he was far from it, being a postdoctoral fellow. When we first started these studies, the research assistants who were doing the accounting came to me and said there was a problem with our record keeping. And I asked why, and they said, well, because some people are recorded as having given more than we paid them, and that can't possibly be right. I said, oh, that's right. In fact, what's happening is that people are opening their wallets, right? They aren't just giving back the money that we paid them, they're adding to it. We have done many, many, many experiments like this. Okay, you can see here that we have almost 10,000 participants pooled here. All of those little tiny colored dots that you see are different participants in these pooled studies. And what I want to draw your attention to is that in these graphs across the x-axis is the level of idealism, so how much people expect others to be pro-social. And along the y-axis are the relevant variables. In particular, here is the summed variable of elevation. And the yellow line is a regression line that's capturing the pattern of the yellow dots when people are in the pro-social condition, when they witness exactly the video that you watched just now or some equivalent to it, right? And down here are what people report in terms of their desire to help. And you see that there's a big contrast between the yellow line and the blue line, okay? When people are elevated, they are much more likely to want to help, but the extent to which they are elevated depends on how idealistic they are. Cynics watch exactly the video that you just watched and report feeling nothing at all. Okay, idealists watch it and they get all choked up and they want to go out and volunteer and assist people. Here are some of the different kinds of dependent measures. Here's a study of over 3,000 people online. And here we just asked how much they would be willing to have their employer deduct money from their paycheck for a charitable donation. And the yellow bars show you what happens when people are in the pro-social condition. Here they're saying they probably would. Here they say they definitely would. And you see that the yellow bars are higher than the blue bars, meaning that when they've seen the pro-social stimulus, they're more motivated than when they've seen the athletic stimulus. And here we are with down here in the lower section, a study of almost 1,500 people on the streets of Los Angeles with actual donations because these participants are being paid. And we cap the monetary amount here at $5 because, as I said, we actually collected more than $5 from some people, but we're not including that in our statistics. And again, you see a difference between the yellow and blue bars in that individuals in the pro-social condition are actually being generous. okay? Now, critically, this kind of plasticity, this kind of flexibility, right, that each of us is potentially pro-social as a function of our prior experience, that's a general overall propensity. But if you think about it, that idealism, that expectation of others' cooperativeness shouldn't just be sort of unconditional, because these questions that we've asked people are just generic questions. In general, how much do you think people are like this? Because imagine how you would feel if you were walking through a neighborhood where, for example, people said hello, the streets were clean, front doors were clearly open and unlocked, or you were walking through a neighborhood where there was graffiti everywhere, there was trash on the street, all the doors were locked, there were bars on the windows. How much would you expect people to be pro-social in each of those two neighborhoods? You're the same person, but you're in different contexts, so your expectations of people's pro-sociality may differ across those. So this suggests that it's not that we have one set of expectations, but rather that we astutely recognize that there are differences across social contexts. Each of us recognize this, and we have different degrees of pro-social expectations, different attitudes, depending on the context that we're in. And this can explain these neighborhood effects where you get, if you get indications that that others are pro-social, then you are more disposed to be pro-social and more disposed to experience emotions like elevation and so on, right? Which are pushing you towards pro-sociality in situations where it's likely to be reciprocated. So if you think further, it's not just the physical context that is a cue, it's also going to be the social context, because although our species is the most cooperative on the planet, it is also the most violent and conflictual. And arguably one of the things that has led to our remarkable degree of cooperation is the benefits of cooperation when one's group is in conflict with another group. So this suggests that idealism should be sensitive to intergroup conflict, where we're more inclined to be idealistic and thus more elevated by members of our in-group than members of our out-group. So to explore this, a number of colleagues and I studied responses to the Black Lives Matter movement and the counter movement, the Back the Blue movement, which was established in opposition to the Black Lives Matter movement. We did this while these public demonstrations were going on, and we randomly assigned participants to one of two videos that we carefully edited, taken from Black Lives Matter movement demonstrations or Back the Blue demonstrations. In both cases, individuals were peaceful, they were nonviolent. In both cases, there was no destruction of property, nor was there any kind of threatening behavior. Instead, people were singing songs, they were embracing one another, right? Each within the context of a particular demonstration. And we explored the extent to which people's attitudes towards these two different social causes would predict the degree of elevation that they experienced when witnessing pro-social behavior by demonstrators. All of the demonstrators were being pro-social, but each was in service of a cause opposed to the other. Okay? And what we found, as indicated here, using the same kind of demonstration that I showed previously, this upper one shows how much people were idealistic towards the Black Lives Matter movement when they were exposed to a Black Lives Matter demonstration. The more idealistic towards that movement, that is, the more that they expected members of that movement to be cooperative, the more they saw their goals as aligned with members of that movement, the more elevation they reported, as shown by this black line here. Okay. In contrast, when those same individuals were shown the Back the Blue demonstration, or not those same individuals, but other individuals who were similarly measured, were shown the Back the Blue demonstration, the more idealistic they were towards the Black Lives Matter movement, the less elevation they experienced. In other words, people are experiencing elevation towards those they see as allies and not towards those they see as opponents. And the opposite is true with regard to idealism towards the police and the two different videos. So when one was idealistic towards the police, seeing the police as generally aligned with one's interests, as pro-social and so on, then seeing Back the Blue movement video caused more elevation but when held a more cynical attitude towards the police, the opposite effect obtained. Okay, so we can conclude from this that elevation following the exposure to a pro-social protagonist clearly is motivating increases in pro-social behavior. It's not just because people feel good. It's very specific to this one emotion elicited by this one set of circumstances. And each of us harbors multiple expectations, multiple idealisms toward other social groups and other contexts. And this affects how much we will be moved by, inspired to be pro-social by actions during a variety of different social events, including those of coalitional conflict, right? So people can be incredibly pro-social with very particular caveats associated. Now, if you think about it, as I said at the outset, we live in a particularly divided and polemical period. One of the things that is contributing to this is clearly media consumption, right? Where people are getting very, very different messages about the goals and degrees of prosociality of others in their community, in their society, and around the world. So with an eye toward the effect of media consumption and recognizing that exposure to others' pro-social actions can promote elevation, that can promote real pro-social action, and that can feed back to alter social interactions and communities. Some undergraduates at UCLA, with the assistance of the Kindness Institute, have started a project. It's currently still being built, so it's in an early phase. But what they're doing is they're soliciting other young people to submit selfie videos, and you see some of them here, in which the young person reports having witnessed a remarkable act of kindness. Okay, importantly, they're not virtue signaling, they're not bragging, they're not talking about something they've done, right? They're just talking about something they've observed, because we think that this is the most powerful way to both elicit elevation and to shape people's expectations of others' behavior. And their goal is to create a snowballing library where more people see it, more people contribute, and by virtue of consuming this media, people will change their orientations, not necessarily on a really durable and lasting basis. That's going to take a lot more than exposure to videos, right? But it can potentially spark the kinds of positive interactions that make a difference on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's very exciting. I'm very inspired to see students at UCLA picking up this possibility and working hard on it. And the Kindness Institute is happy to support their efforts. So I want to turn now to a very different kind of a set of projects that the Kindness Institute has assisted with both funding and research expertise. And that has to do with kindness in healthcare. So there's a widespread recognition today that there is what is called compassion fatigue or compassion burnout. It was clearly exacerbated by the pandemic. Patients complain that healthcare providers often seem unempathetic. Time is often short. They seem harried. And among healthcare professionals, there's an epidemic of burnout where people experience their professions as extremely stressful. They find it hard to be patient and empathetic with their patients, and many are leaving the profession. So heading up a series of projects trying to address this is a member of the Kindness Institute, Dr. Andrew Shaner, who is a psychiatrist at the VA over on Wilshire, and also a professor in the David Geffen School of Medicine. And Dr. Shaner is a key member of a clinic at the West Los Angeles Veterans Affairs Medical Center that is dedicated exclusively to the treatment of current and formerly unhoused veterans. And you see here a photograph that might spark some memories. If you drove down San Vicente Boulevard up until the recent past, you saw a tent city built along the sidewalk just outside the gates of the VA, where many, many unhoused veterans were living There's been a concerted effort to build more housing on the VA campus and try and get those people into housing. But Dr. Shaner and his colleagues treat the medical needs of unhoused and recently unhoused veterans in Los Angeles. And this is a very, very challenging patient population. They have very, very complex medical histories by virtue of their circumstances, but importantly also, frequently they suffer from fairly severe mental health challenges, including high incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder due to their military service and the events therein, and also high rates of substance abuse and dependence. You can imagine that many of them have had experiences with the criminal justice system. Put this all together, and this is a very, very difficult population to treat in a productive manner. It's very stressful for the providers to do so. It's hard to establish positive connections with patients frequently and to maintain a history of care. And Dr. Shaner and his colleagues, building on the sorts of evolutionary approaches that I described earlier, and I should say, by the way, that evolutionary approaches to human behavior are by no means ubiquitous among the faculty in the Kindness Institute. It's just that these are two projects that, by virtue of my own area of research, I'm more familiar with. Dr. Shaner and his colleagues have developed a variety of techniques whereby providers can model pro-social behavior, again, with the idea towards changing people's expectations and promoting pro-social behavior among both patients and colleagues, right? And muting antisocial responses, both antisocial responses from patients and from other members of the care team. Okay? So the basic idea here is, again, that we are all heirs to a universal human psychology that leads us to gauge at an unconscious level. So it's not, there's no suggestion that people are consciously aware that they're doing this, but each of us gauges the likely value of another individual as a future relationship partner, right? So how much can we have a productive cooperation that is going to be mutually beneficial, right? And these mechanisms work very well in the kinds of face-to-face, small-scale communities that characterized our species for the vast majority of its history, right? Our species is about 300,000 years old. Agriculture is only about 20,000 years old. And, large, dense cities are only a few centuries old, right? So basically, we have the psychology of, of individuals living in a small village, but we live in a capitalist society with enormous aggregations of people and very transactional, transient relationships. So these mechanisms don't do a good job in the doctor-patient relationship in contemporary medicine, right? Every dedicated healthcare provider, seeks to do right by their patients. They have a strong ethical imperative to do so, right? It's not about reciprocity from the patient, but instead just simply the desire to help people. And of course, physicians are compensated by their employers, by the insurance companies and so on. It's not that the patient is doing something for the doctor in some kind of cooperative mutualistic interaction, but we are heirs to that ancient psychology. This is what evolutionary biologists call evolutionary disequilibrium, the situation when the environment has changed faster than natural selection has altered the features of the organism. You can think, for example, of the challenges of the obesity epidemic today, where, our ancestors could never supersize, right? They couldn't, get access to huge amounts of calories without expending calories. And as a consequence of that, we overconsume because we have the tastes and preferences of our ancestors, right? So Dr. Shaner and colleagues have developed a variety of techniques where they try and what we can colloquially call hack the mind, right? Where healthcare workers are trained to understand the sources of their negative reactions to their patients. In other words, to sort of lift the lid on these unconscious mechanisms, because if we have knowledge about why we respond the way that we do, then we can counteract those responses. We can discount them, and we can thus more fully follow the ethical imperatives that we subscribe to, right? And at the same time, on a daily basis, in our everyday practices in healthcare contexts, we can institute procedures, policies, and practices that are designed intentionally to undermine those kinds of negative reactions. So how have Dr. Shaner and colleagues gone about this? Well, one thing that they've done, and a key player here is Dr. Yuming Huang, who is the executive director of the UCLA Simulation Center at the David Geffen School of Medicine. So medical students are trained to interact with patients. Initially, obviously, you can't have a medical student examining and working with an actual patient because they're still learning, right? They need practice. And this is true for the students and for the residents and even all the way through to the fellows. So where does that practice come from? In outstanding medical schools like the David Geffen School, there is a whole organization dedicated to providing practice situations using professional actors called patient simulators who are trained to play the role of a patient with a variety of different complaints and symptoms and to respond in different ways to the trainee as they learn how to diagnose and interact with patients, okay? And Dr. Shaner and Dr. Huang together have created what at present is a wireframe prototype, an online system that trains current and future clinicians to interact with patients in challenging situations by training them to think about why they're responding the way that they do and how those responses can affect the patient. And to do so, and I should say, by the way, that there are ambitions of enhancing this system called iHelp, which stands for the Interactive Humanism e-learning program, using artificial intelligence. And Dr. Shaner is currently working with a number of computer scientists and so on, developing AI systems that will more seamlessly emulate the online experience of interacting with a patient through telehealth. Okay, so what does this look like? Well, here we have one of the patient simulators on the left, an outstanding actor who's playing the role of a veteran, Mr. Rayford, okay? And Mr. Rayford, and you see on the right there, is a trainee who is interacting in a telehealth context with Mr. Rayford. Mr. Rayford is very upset. He's upset about having to wait for care. He feels he's been disrespected by the staff. He feels that his pain complaints are not being taken seriously and that people won't give him the medication he needs to manage his pain, okay? And the trainee is interacts with Mr. Rayford here and has a variety of options as to how to respond, right? So Mr. Rayford wants the desk staff to be fired because he feels that they've been disrespectful towards him, right? The trainee is given options of responses such as calm down, nobody's firing anybody, or when did you last use amphetamine or alcohol? Because the trainee has been told that Mr. Rayford has a history of substance dependence, right? I'm so sorry we made you wait, especially when you are in so much pain. And depending on which of these options the trainee selects, they're shunted to a different subsequent video where Mr. Rayford either becomes more upset and less cooperative and more threatening, right? Or Mr. Rayford begins to explain the nature of his problems and the kind of help that he's seeking, okay? So trainees are guided through a kind of choose your own adventure process where they directly experience the benefits of thinking about why they're responding the way that they are responding. So do they resent Mr. Rayford's anger? Do they feel threatened by Mr. Rayford? Or do they try and empathize with Mr. Rayford, right? In another one of these projects, Dr. Shaner and colleagues are actually testing the effects of inserting information into the patient record. And this is done currently at the West Los Angeles VA's Homeless Patient Aligned Care Team. They call this the vivid vignette. And what they intentionally do, and where Dr. Shaner now is currently testing, empirically testing the efficacy of this. So they've already adopted the practice because they have theoretical reasons to think that it works, but now they're establishing an empirical basis for this. What they intentionally do is in interviewing the patient, they try and make note of laudatory experiences that add three-dimensional facets to the patient's profile. And then they make a point of including that, this is what they call the vivid vignette, in the patient notes. And the patient notes are the part of the patient's record that are passed on from one member of a care team to another. This is what, if you watch a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant or a physician, as they're standing outside an exam room, they're looking at a folder, right? Or they're looking at information on a tablet computer. What they're doing is reading the patient notes before they enter the exam room to interact with the patient. They're reminding themselves who the patient is and why the patient is there, okay? And what is being done in this experiment is that participants, in this case, the participants are pre-med students at the undergraduate level in pre-med clubs across the country. So these are would-be physicians, right? And the patients hear an audio recording of the patient simulator, whom I displayed earlier, the role of Mr. Rayford. And Mr. Rayford is either very angry or quite calm. Okay, so participants are randomly assigned to one of those two. And then the participant is either given the standard clinical text. Mr. Rayford is a 56-year-old African-American Army veteran with arthritis, high blood pressure, methamphetamine use disorder. Okay, very standard kind of a profile that they see down at the West Los Angeles VA. Okay, or the same statement with the insertion, not highlighted in red as I've done here, but just in plain text, that Mr. Rayford aspires to be to open a restaurant and that he's a trained chef. And here, again, two UCLA undergraduates, Tanvi Gaiton and Kristen Pichel, are playing central roles in this project. I'm really excited to see young people getting involved with experienced professionals like Dr. Shaner and Dr. Huang as they try and understand how to better promote positive interactions in healthcare, right? And after being assigned to one of these conditions, then either getting an angry patient or a calm patient and either getting the vivid vignette or the absence thereof, the pre-med students are asked, how threatening do you think this individual is? And, how much time do you want to spend with this individual? How many diagnostic tests are you willing to prescribe for this individual, and so on? These results are very preliminary. Tanvi and Kristen are just collecting the data right now, so don't quote me on any of this because all of this may change. But here are some preliminary results. In the top chart, what you see is the perceived likelihood that Mr. Rayford will threaten someone else, okay? And the orange and yellow bars are the conditions in which the participants saw or listened to a recording of an angry Mr. Rayford. And what you see there in the orange bar is what happens when the would-be clinician has seen that Mr. Rayford is a trained chef who hopes to open a restaurant in Georgia versus the control condition where they're just given the standard clinical information. People see the patient as much less threatening when they just get this little extra piece of information, which if you think about it logically should tell you nothing about how threatening Mr. Rayford is. The fact that he's a chef should be irrelevant. If anything, chefs have access to knives, right? So why does it matter? Because it is humanizing Mr. Rayford. It's seeing him as a potentially valuable interaction partner beyond simply the fact that he's a patient and he's angry. The bottom chart shows the same kind of result with regard to the likelihood that he'll hit somebody, okay? So I think it's very promising. It's exciting to see that these undergraduates are gathering empirical evidence to support the practices that Dr. Shaner and his colleagues at the West LA VA have already instituted. And I should say that Dr. Shaner is already promoting these techniques, including the iHelp training tool, at conferences across the country. They've been adopted by quite a number of physicians in a variety of healthcare institutions. And it's really exciting to see these translations of research into practice that really helps to make these interactions more positive and kind for both the patient and the clinician. So as I said, we've been restructuring the Kindness Institute. We're looking forward to a formal relaunch this coming fall. You'll probably see that in your email if you're subscribed to any UCLA email. This time next year, we hope to hold our first Science of Kindness symposium that'll have a public-facing component. Anybody interested in kindness, you, your colleagues, your friends, family members will be welcome to attend. So watch for that, stay tuned. And thank you so much for your attention this morning. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, and you can reach me at the email address there. You can find out more about the Kindness Institute just by Googling Kindness UCLA or by going to this URL. And in the time that remains, I'd be happy to answer any questions or comments that you might have. Don't be shy. I know that everyone has ideas and questions and comments about kindness. So yeah, Diane, go ahead.
Well, the last thing that you just described, I don't know if you were familiar with the doctoring program that we had at UCLA at the medical school until this year, which rather than doing the simulation, I was one of the, what do you want to call it, facilitators or whatever it was. And it was a doctor and a mental health person. And we had like 10 medical students for the year. And we used the actors, the wonderful, wonderful actors. And each week we had a different kind of situation that had really occurred in somebody's practice, like a teenager learning they have HIV positive or they're pregnant or someone has pancreatic cancer. And then we would have a student would interview the patient, and then we would all talk about it, getting all the input from the students as well as from the two faculty members. And we kind of did the same thing, only we were there in person with them. And it was very, very gratifying. I did it for like 10 years until we stopped, till the program ended and they changed the curriculum. So as an old timer, it's exciting and also difficult to see the things where we had human beings being translated into all these online artificial intelligence, things. But it was wonderful to see how students did become aware of their sources of negativity toward patients and how they became more positive. And it was a very wonderful course.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that, Diane. And I actually, way back in graduate school, I had the opportunity to sit in on those kinds of trainee interactions. And there's no question that they're really, really, really positive. One of the things that Dr. Shaner and his colleagues are trying to do, and the West LA VA is, of course, a training center for folks from the medical school and a variety of the other public health healthcare profession schools at UCLA, right? So many of our campus trainees go to the VA for training, and Dr. Shaner and his colleagues provide exactly that kinds of hands-on mentorship. But the challenge that they're trying to address is that that's not scalable, right? That the need is so great that to address the number of practitioners. And remember, it's not just the trainees who need this, but the very experienced practitioners who are leaving the profession because they're burned out. And one of the reasons that they're burned out is because they find it so stressful and so unrewarding to have, interactions with patients where the patients are upset that there's so little time. The insurance companies are an obstacle. There's tons of paperwork to fill out, right? Those of you who felt elevation, and I hope everybody experienced it a little bit when you watched that little video I showed, right? This is a very, very positive feeling, okay? And quite a number of my colleagues in the Kindness Institute have done research showing exactly what the positive mental and physical health benefits of participating in kindness as an altruist can be, right? So the goal here is to enhance the experience of the patient and the experience of the provider at scale, right? There are hundreds of thousands of people who need this training. And so the conventional, traditional way of training medical students, which works great for that, right, can't be scaled up and can't address, the continuing education needs of the many practitioners, because it's simply not feasible. So what we're trying to do, or what Dr. Shaner and Dr. Wong are trying to do here, is not to remove people from the context and not to substitute computers for human beings or anything like that. The role of the AI is to try and make it as realistic as possible using exactly the professional skills of the patient simulators, right? For the simple reason that it's not scalable otherwise. There just aren't enough Dr. Shaners to train other folks, right? And frankly, especially for current practitioners, it's too hard to work into their schedule, right? I hear this all the time from the clinicians. They're already so busy. They're like, we don't have time. But if continuing education, if you can give it to me online and I can, walk on the treadmill while I'm doing this,
Yeah.
then maybe, okay. So the goal, as I said, is not to dehumanize at all, but quite the opposite. But the problem is scalability, and that's why they're doing what they're doing, and why the Kindness Institute has supported them. Yeah, Albert, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. Has anyone within the research done, I'm thinking of emotional intelligence in corporate America or MBA, you're talking about schools of medicine, but listening to your presentation, I was thinking of corporate America, which is quite different. And well, I think sometimes I would like to see programs with ethics and engineering and computer science and MBA. But I think this could be helpful in some way. I don't know how it could be integrated into MBA programs. But when you think of anyone in leadership, I think this kind of program could be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know just from conversation that Dr. Shaner and Dr. Huang have thought about. They, of course, are, they're in the healthcare field, but they have thought about ways that this kind of training could be expanded to other fields with, corresponding changes to the context and the plot, if you will, right? I think that their first target after they really build this out is law enforcement, right? Because they see in their clinical practice, as I mentioned, many of Dr. Shaner's patients have histories of involvement with the criminal justice system, in large part due to their mental health and substance use challenges, right? And so they see directly the importance of enhancing empathy and reducing exacerbating behavior by law enforcement personnel. Right now, you probably know that the LA County Sheriff's Department under Sheriff Luna, they are really, well, they're under court orders, but even independent of that, they're struggling to address the fact that so many incarcerated individuals, in fact, need mental health care. And there's a pilot program which Dr. Philippe Bourgeois, who's an anthropologist in the David Geffen School of Medicine, and I'm going to get to the corporate angle in just a minute, Albert. So hang with me. Dr. Bourgeois and colleagues, they've been studying, he's a member of the Kindness Institute, and they've been studying a program in the Twin Towers, which is the largest metropolitan corrections institution in the United States, where incarcerated individuals who are there, who are don't suffer mental health challenges themselves, and they're there for the long term due to their past actions, they have actually started just on their own. 2 individuals started this, and it's now grown to something like 15 people. They essentially are peer kindness counselors in the pods. Those are the sections of the jail which house individuals who have severe mental health challenges, okay? And essentially what they're doing is they're just teaching kindness skills, really, is what they're doing. They're trying to teach those patients who are incarcerated, but they're really patients, ways of avoiding escalating interactions, right? I'm hopeful, and we'll see what the future holds and what the funding resources that we can amass to assist these fine investigators. I'm hopeful that we'll see a convergence of Dr. Shaner and Dr. Bourgeois' efforts in the future. Now, in terms of the corporate world, I think you're absolutely right. And in fact, I've been approached, none of it has come to fruition yet, but I've been approached by a number of very large nationwide chains. If I mention their names, you'd recognize them right away, about programs to increase kindness, both in terms of their personnel's interaction with one another and their interaction with their customers, right? Because, CEOs are recognizing that it's hard to retain employees, right? It's a very tight labor market right now. They want people to have high job satisfaction, right? It reduces their healthcare costs when their employees are happier, right? Because that directly translates to physical and mental health. And it increases customer satisfaction. So it's a win-win from the corporate angle. As yet, to my knowledge, programs specifically designed for the private sector don't exist, right? And I've talked to Dr. Shaner and Dr. Huang about the possibility. Professor Cassie Morgenler, who's in the Anderson School of Business at UCLA, she studies happiness. She's kind of a happiness expert, which is kindness adjacent, if you will. And she's a member of the Faculty Advisory Committee of the Kindness Institute. And I'm hopeful that we can, in the future, find synergies that will bring these things together in a way that can make them available to the private sector. Again, thinking, look, the scale is so large that really, an automated online training system is probably the most practical way to do it. But at present, those are aspirations, not projects. So, now I'm cognizant that we're actually over time here. I think I see.
Actually, I was going to ask really quick, if I could, if you don't mind, is there anything being done on the part of kindness to oneself?
So
is that
yeah, so there I would refer you. So there's an overlap between kindness and the practice of mindfulness, in particular mindful meditation, and quite a number of faculty in the Kindness Institute are research scholars in the field of mindfulness. I was mentioning in the discussion before we got started the work of Professor Michelle Krask in psychology and psychiatry, who works with mindfulness interventions for at-risk youth, reducing suicidality, enhancing pro-social behavior, and so on. Mindfulness frequently involves a kind of kindness to self component, right? Recognizing when one is berating oneself, why one feels anxious, what one can do to change those thought patterns, and so on, right? So these are certainly related topics. I would direct interested listeners to the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA, founded by Dr. Sue Smalley, an emeritus professor at UCLA. This is the world's leading research center on the scientific study of mindfulness, and they have a substantial education component. They have classes, both for students at UCLA and for members of the general public. They have online materials available where they try and teach mindfulness, not try, they succeed in teaching mindfulness. And it involves a kindness to self aspect. We don't see that directly as part of the Kindness Institute's mandate, precisely because the Bedari Foundation's goals in setting up the Institute was to promote kindness more broadly. And that starts with kindness to self. There's no question about that. But we want to have a division of labor where we see the folks at the Mindful Awareness Research Center as the real experts in that. And there's overlap in our faculty membership and so on. But we don't want to duplicate their efforts in any way. And instead, that's why you see this focus on social transmission processes that I've described. I can stick around for a few minutes. I have students waiting for me, so I am going to have to scoot in just a little bit. And I realize I talked a lot, and I want to give folks an opportunity if they have questions or comments. I'm looking at CJ's chat comment. It looks like it's just kindness. So thank you for your kindness, CJ. Any other, not just kindness, of course, I don't mean to diminish its importance at all, but I don't think there's a question in there that I can answer. So if anybody else has questions or comments, I'm happy to take a couple of minutes to address them. Okay, I guess my parting thoughts then. I think the students are on the right track in that media consumption project. People often ask me, what can they do in their daily lives? What's an easy step that they can do to enhance their own orientation towards kindness? And I think the easiest thing that you can do is just to be aware of your media diet, right? there's existing scholarship showing that people who watch a lot of local news overestimate the probability that they'll be subject to violent attack, right? And this is, of course, because if it bleeds, it leads on the local news, right? Our evolved psychology orients us to those kinds of events, but we're just not designed for this kind of an environment where, you know, we can see images of and hear about events that happen far away from us and that don't directly involve us. So I'm on the same page as the students. I've become much more mindful of my own media consumption. And I think that's an easy thing that everyone can do on a regular basis. So I'll leave you with that as a pragmatic suggestion. Please, if you're interested, do get in touch with me. Visit the Kindness Institute website, and you know, keep an eye out for our relaunch in the coming fall. And thank you so much for your attention, your participation.
Excellent parting words, as well as general words, as well as your words in general. Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation, and thank you to those of you who came online. And Dr. Fessler, would we be able to get your slides so that we can share them with those?
Sure. I'd be happy to send those to you. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great.
And
wonderful.
Thank you, Maria, for getting everything to come together as you have, and Aisha for the kind introduction. So be well.
Our pleasure.
Stay kind, everyone. Live long and prosper, as they say in Star Trek. And I hope to see you again in the future. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.